Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast? Please subscribe, leave a review, comment, share, and consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, even at the producer and sponsorship levels. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Cynthia O. Young about her book, All Are Welcome: How to Build a Real Workplace Culture of Inclusion that Delivers Results. Cynthia O. Young, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the San Francisco area, and I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about inclusion in the workplace, specifically your book, All Are Welcome: How to Build a Real Workplace Culture of Inclusion that Delivers Results. There's so much research out there about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Both the business case for it, the human case for it. We'll get into a lot of that as we have our conversation today. And I like how you focused on having that real workplace culture, but also a results-driven culture, so that we can have both. We can have a safe, psychologically safe, welcoming place for everyone to bring their whole authentic self to work and contribute in meaningful ways, but we can also make sure that there are really good positive results from all of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. So this is what we'll be discussing together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Cynthia's bio with everybody. Cynthia O. Young is Robinhood's Vice President of Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging, partnering with business leaders, employee resource groups, and the people experience team to support Robinhood's mission to democratize finance for all. Cynthia is also the founder of Breaking Glass Forums, developing strategies to accelerate diverse leadership in inclusive organizations. She has established and led diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for over 15 years as an executive at organizations in multiple industries, including Charles Schwab, GitHub, and Yahoo. Wonderful to have you. A tremendous background. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your personal context or story before we dive on into the conversation?
Absolutely, John. I think the professional background is one thing, but for many people who are in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, like myself, the personal background matters just as much. And so for what I tell many folks when I do this work, one of the reasons that I'm in it is because I'm an Asian woman. I am the daughter of immigrants. I'm first generation born here in the US. I have a brother who is gay. I have another brother who is developmentally disabled. My father served in the Air Force. I've got a family, 2 kids, right? So I've got all the protected classes covered in my immediate family. And growing up with all of that influence has really given me this sharpened sense of empathy for other lived experience and a desire to correct for inequities that I've seen, right? I've grown up seeing people underestimate my brother who is disabled. I've grown up seeing people spewing hate at my brother who is gay for no reason other than who he loves, right? And so that's a really strong motivator for me for why I do this work.
Yeah, thank you for that background. And much of what you just said resonates with me. Now, I'm a straight cisgender white dude. I don't personally have some of those different elements of diversity, but within my family and close circle, I do. And that resonates with me. And for example, one of the things you just mentioned was your disabled sibling. I have the same. And so growing up with a sister who was just a few years older than me and was developmentally challenged in so many ways, physically and mentally, and to see how she was treated, really, I don't know, it kind of just shoved into me like this sense for equity and justice, and to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, who don't have a voice, right? And so I admit, my privilege, and I come to this conversation from a place of privilege, but I do also come from a place of lived experience where I've seen the pain, and the challenges and the hurt that people have had to deal with, based, on just their background, their upbringing, their whatever protected class you might talk about. So I think this will be a great conversation. I really appreciate your work in this space, your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and creating cultures and safe places of belonging for everyone. We need it more than ever. And so this will be a fun conversation. As we get started, why don't you tell us about why you wrote the book? Clearly you're passionate about all of this, so I'm sure that's part of it. But why this book? Why now?
Great question. So a couple of reasons for the book and now. I think in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder back in 2020, right, we saw this outpouring of focus and support on how to drive more racial equity worldwide, right? Not just here in the US. And you saw companies really coming out and stating their commitments to driving more social justice inside their organizations and in the world at large. And so there was this huge focus, right, on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, just in general, that spurred a lot of action in this space. And so I saw that and I thought, this is really a time for organizations who are trying to do their best, but don't really know what to do, right, in this space, and see if I could put something out there that could help them, right? And then the second reason is that, like, for me, like I've always been one person, sometimes with a team, sometimes not, right? Operating within a single organization to try to drive this work. And there's, so there's limits to what you can do, right, in that kind of a role. And with that backdrop and context of what was going on in the world, it just seemed like there's an opportunity to really scale the impact that I could have, right, in driving change beyond just sort of my proverbial four walls that I was in, and using the book to help, drive more leverage, not just for myself, but for anyone who's really trying to drive progress in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in their organizations. And so that's really sort of the origins of the why behind the book. Like I have, been in this space for close to 20 years at this point. I've learned a lot along the way. And I'm hopeful that the lessons that I've learned, I can impart in the book and help others kind of avoid some of the mistakes so that we can, again, accelerate even further and faster, farther.
I love that. Further, faster, farther, because we have come a long way in the last couple of decades, but there's so much farther we need to go. And like you said, the social context under which, the George Floyd moment happened really shone a light on how far yet we have to go. There are still so many challenges and problems. And, I just think of the last 5 years as really just being a wake-up call for a lot of people who thought, oh, things are getting better. Things are, we're really in a much better place. Well, it turns out we aren't as far as we thought we might have been. And there's a lot of work left to do. So I appreciate your commitment to this. And I'm excited to dive on in. Why don't you break down for us some of those key elements in the book? We don't have time to talk about everything in the book, but if there's anything that you would really like to highlight, or, 2 or 3 main components that you feel are most essential to convey as we go throughout the rest of this conversation, why don't you go ahead and share those?
Definitely. I think, there's a few things that I think are really important for people to recognize. One being that this work, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, is not just about talent. I think a lot of people, particularly who are in human capital management, automatically go to that place of, okay, is it, I need to like figure out how to hire more people from diverse backgrounds into my organization. And it's not just about hiring. It's not just about talent. It has to be, I think one of the points that I try to make in the book is that you have to really look at this holistically from a core strategy perspective. Like, how does diversity, equity, inclusion matter to your business? Right. And how do you weave that throughout all aspects of your business and culture's DNA to really drive holistic change? Because just focusing on talent, I think we've done that, honestly, for 20, 40 years now, and it hasn't driven that much change. So we have to do something different moving forward. We've got to think about this more broadly in terms of the customers we serve, the products that we're developing, the services that we're providing. How does that all relate to equity and inclusion, and how are we serving diverse needs across the board in our processes and systems that we've set up? Talent plays a huge role in that, but if we're not thinking strategically about that from a marketplace perspective, we're kind of missing that opportunity to tie it all together into a virtuous cycle. So I think that's absolutely one of the key things that people need to really take away from the book.
I really like that, the virtuous cycle. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about social impact work. So that's a space that I do a lot of work. And there's a lot of different ways of framing up social impact, but I think diversity, equity, and inclusion and this belonging conversation is a big piece of driving positive social change, and it's absolutely necessary. And so if we're really trying to have, create this systemic change, this virtual cycle, as you call it, we want to drive broader social impact beyond just, kind of the traditional diversity metrics that we might see in relation to talent and human capital within an organization. So that's what I'm hearing you say. I completely agree. There's so much more. Like, just take, for example, social impact investing. How are companies really committing their resources towards providing products and services to the consumer, and how do they invest their capital? That's a huge question, and there's tons of potential there to do more.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the examples that some companies are now starting to set in this space, thinking beyond, right, just their talent to like the broader ecosystem that they can impact. Like the NASDAQ, they have a new rule of companies that are listing, right, they have to have diverse boards. Right. Goldman Sachs has said that they will only underwrite IPOs in companies that have diversity on their boards. State Street that does something similar with their Fearless Girl campaign, where they encourage more diversity and gender diversity on their boards of companies that they invest in. Right. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, all of the employee activists that are now, coming to their leaders and demanding change beyond customer activism and shareholder activism, right? All of these influences, people are looking for us for companies and organizations to really do more because they see other institutions failing us in this space.
Check out my new book, The Future Leader, Creating and Transforming Next-Gen Organizations. Stemming from 2 decades of professional experience and over 600 in-depth interviews with executives, thought leaders, and scholars from across the globe, The Future Leader will help you explore the ordinary, everyday actions that will help you to prepare to lead in the future of work, to respond to an uncertain future, and to produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Academy, courses, micro-credentials, and certificates to upskill and reskill for the future of work. All HCI Academy courses, micro-credentials, and certificates are designed, developed, and delivered by award-winning and internationally renowned scholars, educators, thought leaders, executives, and practitioners. Our courses, micro-credentials, and certificates will help you make your mark on the future of work and make an immediate impact in your organizations. Check out the HCI Academy and our many course offerings and certificates to upskill and reskill for the future of work. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us. That's an interesting point too. If I can just double click on that for a second. So, for example, younger millennials and Gen Z workers, there's been a lot of attitudinal surveys and studies on this that show a heightened sense of distrust in traditional institutions among those groups. So particularly government institutions. And so when you talk to a younger millennial or Gen Z about social change, for example, and you ask them, how is that going to happen? Predominantly, they say it's going to happen through business, through the organizations like yours and mine, who are hopefully trying to make a positive social impact. And, is that true? Well, it's complicated, right? There's multiple pathways of social impact in government and nonprofits and various institutions all play a role. And so I don't want to throw all those out, obviously, but it demonstrates this kind of distrust of institutions, particularly among younger individuals, and the need for businesses, for corporations to really up their game and to leverage their capacity to drive positive social impact and social change. So anyways, you were just saying that. I just wanted to reemphasize that a little bit because I think that's a really, really important point.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you doubled down on that point because it is really important. And that's what I love actually about this like younger generation and their attitudes towards diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Like they just expect it, right? And so it's kind of like any company that isn't working on this space. And I make this point in the book too, like, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you? Like, what kind of future do you see for yourself if you're not like, catering to a more diverse world? Like we are globalized right now. And, every successive generation is more diverse racially, ethnically than the generation before, right? And so, this is not something that we can ignore if we want to position our organizations for not just hiring great talent in the future, but serving our, more diverse marketplaces and customers as well. So it's really important that I think to what you said earlier, like organizations need to step up because we have higher expectations now.
Yeah, and I would love for organizations to step up just out of their generous nature and that they want to make the world a better place. But even if you put aside like the social benefits and the human case for all of this, just the bottom line dollars and cents reality is that if companies don't embrace this, if they don't do this, they're not going to attract good people to their business in terms of employees, and they're really going to shoot themselves in the foot in terms of their customer base. So the bottom line dollars and cents, business case of all of this is, yeah, you better start doing it if you aren't already, and really be committed to it.
Definitely. And, and I think, it's also important not to lose the fact that we're talking about human beings, right? And I think as human beings, we all want to do the right thing. And recognizing that we do have an impact on people's experiences, right? Through every sort of policy that we make inside a company to the practices that we have. And, one of the things that I often hear is, it's like, well, we've like grown organically, and we've got some great diversity because we actually haven't had some sort of singular focus, because we all care about it, and it's just sort of coming out in that way. And I think that can only take organizations so far. Right. So yes, it might be great that you have some diversity today, but what are you missing out on by not being intentional about it? Right. And you can point to, okay, like you're a really successful company today without necessarily having focused on it, but is that always going to be the case in the future? Right. And so I think we tend to look at it as sort of our definition of success by what we've done, as opposed to like, what do we need to do next to continue to evolve and grow and be more successful in the future, right? Because I think we're missing out on having the right level of perspective at the table if we're not intentionally focusing on bringing that perspective in.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And trying to look to the future in terms of what inclusion and belonging means and what it will look like and what the future of work demands from organizations, that's really essential, rather than dragging our feet, kind of being dragged along to play catch up for what we should have been doing all along. And that's honestly what a lot of organizations are doing. And I think, for example, I don't want to throw anyone specifically under the bus, but I'm a university professor and I do consulting work as well. And at my university, recently, there was a case where I was working with a particular department who was going through the hiring process for a new faculty position, and this was a STEM position. And we know that STEM is disproportionately male dominated, and that's certainly the case in higher ed, and that's certainly the case in this department at this university. Mm-hmm. And so, we made a very conscious effort to broaden the pool, try to get as many great diverse applicants into the pool as possible. And to their credit, they did that. So those metrics look good. They did a good job there. Where they totally fell flat was they did not interview a single woman or person of color in the entire interview process. And they claimed that race and gender had nothing to do with it, that they were just picking the most qualified people. And all I can do is shake my head. I'm just like, what in the world is happening here? This is not okay. And in their mind, they had done their due diligence. They had made sure they had a diverse pool. And then they felt like they had given everyone a fair shot, and then chose to interview people. Then, of course, that led to conversations about bias and how you go about the screening process and choosing how, what's most important to focus in on, and all those sorts of things that get into the nitty gritty of like the systems of oppression and inequities and those sorts of things. And my point in all of this, again, not to necessarily throw this department under the bus or anything, but these systems are ingrained and they have to be actively disrupted if we hope to have positive long-term change. And it's not enough to just say, well, organically, things are happening fine. This is a case where, this institution, this department in particular, they're not only lagging. I mean, it was very, very sad to see how this was playing out. And they're lagging decades behind in terms of their mentality and their approach and their ability to really attract diversity and really have an inclusive culture within the department. There's so much work to do. So we need to, of course, get up to speed, but then we need to be looking to the future. And if we're not, we're going to be so far behind the 8 ball, and it's only going to hurt our teams and our organizations, not to mention all of those disadvantaged individuals who didn't even get a fair shot or a good look in the first place.
Yeah, I love that example for so many reasons, John, because I think, you're pointing out a couple of different things that I think are really important for anyone who's in a position of power to make change, like needs to pay attention to, right? One being, how do I define success? Like, what am I looking for in terms of like capability for this role? And am I just sort of leaning on old tropes, right? Or existing definitions, or am I thinking about this in a way that's really, unique to my organization, our needs now and moving forward into the future. Right. And so, am I really defining the requirements for the role in a way that is allowing for inclusion to happen? So I think that's a really important point one. And I think the second piece of this is just like, very often when we look at candidates that we're evaluating and we compare them to each other, right? And you have some set of qualifications that you're assessing all these candidates against, and there's always going to be somebody who seems like they tick more of those boxes, right? And more often than not, that somebody tends to be in the majority group because they've had more opportunity to be able to tick those boxes, right?
Well, and the very boxes that they choose to include that need to be ticked are in their, it's leaning their direction already anyways, right?
Exactly. Back to the whole, like, how are you defining the role requirements and success, right? And I think what often gets lost in the conversation and clearly wasn't part of the initial conversation within that department was, what do we need from a departmental level? What do we need from a team level? Like, what are we missing in terms of a perspective that can make us all better, right? As opposed to just like one-to-one comparison of like one candidate qualifications to another. Because when you do that one-to-one, like it's really hard to justify. And then you get down that rat hole of, well, just because this person's a woman, does that mean I need to hire them? Well, no, but that woman might bring a really different perspective that you're missing in the organization that is going to help you actually excel, in either, being empathetic with your students or, in the university case, or, being able to help you provide marketing insight to, your customers who might be, have some percentage who are women, right? Or whatever the reasoning can be, like you have to like draw that line, right, to how that perspective is going to be helpful for you. And that's the thing that I think people need to think more about and focus on when they're making decisions around who comes in, like as part of the in group versus who is out.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Cynthia, this has just been a really fun conversation. We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more. And so everyone needs to go get your book so they can learn more about all of this. Before we wrap up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Everyone can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Cindy O. Young, and buy my book through my website, cynthiaoyoung.com. It has all the links to all the places that you can buy it. And especially if you support independent bookstores, I'd encourage folks to go there. And I would say the last word on this topic is don't be afraid to do something different than what you've been doing in this space, right? I think a lot of us come to this with a fear of like doing something wrong or offending somebody inadvertently. I think that if you take the effort to actually like get educated and get some insight and genuinely, authentically are curious about other people, you will be given some grace in that respect. But it shouldn't be an excuse to not do anything. Like we have to do something, and it's better to do something than nothing.
Yes, absolutely agree. And again, I'm a straight cisgender white dude. I have all the privileges. I don't really have any sort of diversity. I'm part of the dominant, privileged group, and it's something that I try to be engaged in. And I'm sure that I say dumb things sometimes, or that I am insensitive, or put my foot in my mouth on occasion. Those sorts of things. But I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to get into the space, to try to support those who need support, to give voice to those who need a voice. And there's no excuse for me to not do that. And so I just echo what you said, like let's all try to get engaged and involved in the work. It's super important. And ultimately that will give us the best chance of driving change when collectively we all work at it together.
Thank you so much for that, John, and thank you for your allyship.
Well, it's a pleasure. I do the best I can and know how. It's been a pleasure, Cynthia, to be with you. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Cynthia can do for you. Check out her book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership, the journey of becoming a truly remarkable leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There is no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of your problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Please subscribe, leave a review, comment, share, and consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, even at the producer and sponsorship levels. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.